Hello, and welcome to the password cracking tutorial with Hashcat presented by Ahjax. In today's three-part tutorial, we'll cover the following topics. We'll give an introduction of password cracking, then we'll cover the password cracking methodology, then install some needed tools and software for the tutorial we'll do, and then lastly we'll do a walkthrough tutorial where we'll crack an encrypted PDF as well as a list of MD5 hashes. So first off, why crack passwords? Well, there are several use case scenarios, including in digital forensics and law enforcement, where you crack files that criminals have encrypted, testing employee passwords and password hashing strength of your company, which is often done through a pen test, and perhaps you may want to retrieve lost passwords on some of your personal documents. So while we'll be talking about cracking password, we're actually cracking password hashes. If passwords weren't hashed, they'd be in plain text format already, and there wouldn't be any purpose in following this tutorial that we're doing. That said, we'll still refer to cracking as password cracking throughout the tutorial, as that's what the name and phrase used in most of the industry. On this slide, there's an example of how plain text passwords are typically encrypted. Usually you have a plain text password that you enter into a form, and then there's some sort of hashing algorithm. In this case, we're using MD5. And then to decrypt that hash, you'll use something like Hashcat or John the Ripper to retrieve the plain text password. And so what our video will be doing is we'll be taking some encrypted files, retrieving their hashes, and then using Hashcat to get the plain text version of passwords. So password cracking isn't quite as simple as opening up a terminal, typing in Hashcat, and then getting the needed passwords. Passwords come in different lengths and sizes, key spaces, and even languages. And they're also hashed in many, many different ways. Some of the hashing algorithms include SHA-256, MD5, and others. And so what this means is that if you dive straight into the command line and immediately start to try and crack passwords, you could get unnecessarily bogged down and lack important needed information. For example, if you're a forensics examiner and because of your negligence, you're unable to unlock documents or computer accounts, criminals could go free. Or maybe your company concludes that their hashed passwords are unhackable, but a month later a hacker follows a proven methodology and cracks most of the passwords. For these reasons, it's important to follow a proven methodology as you attempt to crack passwords, especially as you're first learning how to crack passwords and use Hashcat. So the methodology we cover and use is taken from the book Hashcrack, Password Cracking Manual version 2.0 by Netmux. We recommend you get this book if possible, as it's a well-written and neatly organized source. When I bought the book, it was selling for about $10 on Amazon. So the methodology is listed here on this slide and is broken down into 9 steps. Let's talk briefly about each step. Under extract hashes, this is where we get a hash from our target. The target could be a user account, a router, a document, whatever it may be. Then we format the hashes, which is based on your cracking tool's preferred method. So John the Ripper and Hashcat want hashes fed into their systems in different ways. Once we have the hashes, then we evaluate the hash strength. So first off, determine how the target's password was hashed. And then based on the hashing algorithm used, or the hash type, the hash's cracking speed may be slow, fast, or somewhere in between. If the hash is slow, you'll need to be very selective in what dictionaries, masks, and attack types you use. So this may include learning more about the target. If it's a fast hash, like MD5, you can be less worried about what types of dictionaries, masks, and attack types you use. So number 4 is calculating your cracking rig capabilities. This will tell you just how fast your computer can crack different hashes. For NIC systems, which also includes Macs, the command is /hashcat-b, and Windows it's hashcat64.exe-b. In step 5, we formulate a plan. So based on what you've learned so far in the methodology, come up with a game plan. And so this step is where you decide what types of dictionaries, word lists, masks, and attack types you want to perform on your target. And then we start analyzing the passwords. So note on this step, if you're using a single hash, you can actually skip this step. And if you haven't attempted to crack anything yet, you can also skip this step. But during this phase, this is where you look at passwords you've already been able to crack and analyze those results for any clues or patterns. So, for example, you could be analyzing your company's database, and after you've cracked, let's say, 25% of the passwords, you could notice that almost all of the passwords are starting off with EG135. You could then use this knowledge to leverage your next set of attacks. In the 7th step, this is where you actually start cracking. So based on the previous steps, you leverage what you've learned to crack the passwords. Here you may need to create custom mask attacks or rules as well. In step 8, this is where you start attempting to crack some of the stubborn passwords. You can do this through Prince processor, custom Markov chains, etc. But in our tutorial, we aren't going to cover this step. This tutorial just covers some of the basics, and then as you go on and you learn more, you can learn how to use these tools. And then the last step is to repeat it. So you return to step 4, and then you keep learning and making needed adjustments. So to summarize this methodology, first we get the hash from the document and figure out how strong the hash is. Then we figure out our machine's capabilities. And lastly, we create a cracking plan and start cracking. So to show just how effective this methodology can be, let's pretend we're trying to crack a Wi-Fi password. And let's say you're able to get the Wi-Fi password's hash, and you figure out that it's a WPA, WPA2, and the password is 10 characters long using a standard US English keyboard. So knowing just this information, how long do you think it would take to brute force the password? So go ahead and pause the video here and think about that for a second. Alright, now that you've had some time to think about that, let's move on to the next slide. So without knowing anything else, cracking this password would take, on average, roughly 33 quintillion guesses to crack if we're just brute forcing it. If you have a rig that can attempt 8,000 WPA, WPA2 hashes a second, as my 2015 MacBook Pro can, brute forcing this password would take roughly 4 quadrillion seconds, or 132 million years, to crack. That said, if we follow the methodology, we could learn more about the password. We could learn that the password comes from a router which has a default password. We learned that default password, after some searching online, uses only the digits between 2 and 7, which this reduces our character set from 96 to 6. And since users rarely change their default passwords on their devices, it's likely that the default password will still work. So knowing this, if we attempt to brute force the password now, it would take roughly 30.2 million attempts. With our rig, this would take a little under 3,800 seconds, or roughly an hour. You could reduce this time even further if you find, for example, a list online of already cracked default passwords for the particular router, use a word list or something else. But with just brute forcing, by using the methodology and researching for a couple of hours, you'd be able to decrease your time from 132 million years to 1 hour. That's a decrease by 99 point, I'm not quite sure what decimal place that is, but lots of decimal points percentage. So following the methodology can be very, very useful and save you quite a bit of time. This is a bit of a drastic example, not unrealistic, but a bit of a drastic example just to show you how effective following the password cracking methodology can be. And so now that we've covered a bit of the background into password cracking, and you have a basic understanding of the password cracking methodology, let's move on to the next video where we'll install our password cracking tools.